Mon Mothma's life and career are considered key parts to the success of the rebellion. Working secretly with the likes of Luthen Rael, Senator Bail Organa, and Leia Organa, Mothma became a sort of a linchpin in bringing the Rebel Alliance together. She made a bold move to publicly speak to the citizens of the galaxy, even if it meant putting her own life on the line. Others, like Minister Patina Marmar Zvor, wasn't so lucky and was murdered by the hands of Darth Vader after criticizing Palpatine, saying he was ruining everything and was unlovable. But because of Mon Mothma's bravery, by using her opportunity and influence, she was able to open the eyes of many while simultaneously lighting a spark in them. When she went before the Senate, this is what she said: "I believe we are in crisis. The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. When truth leaves us, when we let it slip away, when it is ripped from our hands, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest." How does truth and reason become an endangered species? As Hannah Arendt wrote in her 1951 book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, i.e. the reality of experience, and the distinction between true and false, i.e. the standards of thought, no longer exist. An early 20th century Italian Marxist, philosopher, politician, and anti-fascist, Antonio Francesco Gramsci, routinely voiced his criticism of Benito Mussolini and was imprisoned for it. He was a prolific writer in prison and is best known for his theory of cultural hegemony, which describes how the state and ruling capital class, the bourgeoisie, use capital institutions to maintain wealth and power in capitalist societies. Gramsci argues that the vast majority of people adopt the worldview and the ways of thinking of the ruling groups, and unless something snaps and they get a radically different perspective on things, they tend to view the world from the hegemonic position of the rulers. In order for the empire to sell hard power, soft power is used to convince the public that the hard power is necessary. If the ruling groups are going to be attacking a certain people, whether it's poor people, homeless people, or workers, you have to dehumanize those individuals. You have to criminalize them. You have to make them look like the other, like they're somehow subhuman. You have to create the ideological, political, and cultural environment to be able to carry out this aggression. Discontentment is created, and in order to make sure it's not channeled at the system, at the elite ruling group, that discontentment is redirected into scapegoats. That's the scapegoat function, to channel that discontentment away from the system, which is the real source of our problems, and towards these scapegoated communities. Star Wars fans at some level realize and agree that throwing a wrongly accused man into an offshore mega prison where no one leaves is literally what the Empire does, right? There's a moral story here. Whether we call our values socialist, capitalist, liberal, conservative, Christian, atheist, empire, rebels, they're human values. But we need to show how we have common interests. Mark Wayne spoke about a term called social judo. In judo, other people's momentum is redirected away from you. In a social sense, when you feel people are angry about something, the momentum, that revolutionary spirit that's building up within society, is then redirected away from the revolutionary change. Social judo is what is used by empire. We see it utilized by the Galactic Empire in Star Wars in an attempt to halt any organizing by the rebellion, and we see it implemented in our own world between the liberals and conservatives, all to redirect our focus away from the military-industrial complex, wealth inequality, and class solidarity. Looking at the Galactic Empire, they were able to justify the transfer of wealth into their own accounts, while also using economics as a means to throttle planets viewed as being, in any way, rebellious. Its capitalism was an admission for how it viewed the general population, resources that could be discarded. Rise and Fall puts it this way: the wealth and resources and prosperity dragged from outlying worlds allowed the galaxy's rulers on Coruscant to enjoy opulent lifestyles, while also ensuring that the Star Destroyers and Stormtrooper legions that the totalitarian system relied upon would continue to be funded. In essence, the galaxy paid for its own subjugation. Economics was a weapon to be used against the populations of worlds that were being dismantled around them. The imperial machine is constantly aiming to divide and figuring out new ideological and political ways of keeping us down and stopping the greater populace from uniting against the empire. This could be seen as infighting within a particular party, or the Democratic Party and Democratic politicians co-opting terminology like DEI and woke to divert from the transnational capitalist class, or corralling people into tribalistic communities through soft power in order to foster an us versus them mentality. Identity has become overblown when it comes to revolutionary spaces. Not that identity is not valuable. I mean, we all have identity, and it's the flavor of humanity. You know, we have different languages and foods and cultures. But the problem is that we exacerbate that concept in our minds and our communities to the point where it creates walls that prevent us from reaching out and locking arms. The Rebel Alliance was forced to figure this out. Before the rebellion became allied, there were disputes between rebel factions and how to effectively combat the Empire. We see this clearly between Saw Gerrera and Lutho Rael and the rest of the Alliance. Although they didn't agree, they all had a unifying purpose for the things they did. If you'd like some real-life examples of rebellions unifying against the transnational capitalist class, look up the Sandistas in Nicaragua, the Bolshevik Revolution, or Captain Ibrahim Traore's military coup in Burkina Faso. It's difficult for rebellions to last, especially when the global capitalist system will just aim all of its guns toward it, to the point where it's just strategically impossible. Ibrahim Traore has been making a commotion as he continues to distance Burkina Faso from Western hegemony. Since Ibrahim Traore took over office, Burkina Faso reportedly made $18 billion from their gold mines, which is what the West would have been making from their concessions. They're aiming all of their guns at Burkina Faso right now. But Traore is inspiring revolutionaries within the countries that are turning their guns on them. This is what decolonization looks like. This is why they want him dead. The idea of a revolution is like a virus, and no matter what the Empire tries to do to stop it, it will continue to spread. This is what happened in Star Wars as a fascist dictatorship oppressed the galaxy, and again when the First Order rose to power with authoritarian-type control. While identitarianism and fascism are on the rise, while the transnational capitalist class attempts to seize more power, the world is pushing back. Due to economic sanctions and tariffs, diversification of foreign exchange reserves, alternative payment systems, and the rise of central bank digital currencies, many global partners are increasingly choosing to distance themselves from the US-centric systems. As of May this year, 11 countries have allied to drop the US dollar. Even Burkina Faso has started a coalition to counter the influence of regional and Western powers. The virus is spreading, and the Empire is nervous. Mon Mothma wasn't the only one who was integral to the Rebel Alliance. Individuals like Cassian Andor played a massive role in the rebellion and ultimately became an unsung hero. Andor had done an immense amount behind the scenes, and unbeknownst to others in the Star Wars universe, aside from us as viewers, they didn't know how much of a role he had. Cassian did awful things he would like to forget, lost people he will always remember, was abused and taken advantage of by the system, and walked away multiple times only to find himself back in the thick of it because of his convictions. If it wasn't for individuals like Cassian Andor, the rebellion would never have succeeded. Small or big, we can all play a part. And it's not all sunshine and rainbows as we saw from the Andor series. Rebellions are messy. Just before heading to Scarif in the film Rogue One, Cassian says this: "We've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion. Spies, saboteurs, assassins. Everything I did for the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget. I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in, a cause that was worth it. Without that, we're lost. Everything we've done would have been for nothing. I couldn't face myself if I gave up now. None of us could." In a way, Andor became a hidden figure in the story. In our world, this could be similar to how Bonhoeffer was a hidden figure who stood against Nazi fascism. Claudette Colvin, who refused to give up her seat on a bus months before Rosa Parks did. Desmond Doss, who demonstrated anti-war protests within a war itself and saved 75 soldiers without firing a single shot. And Irina Sendler, who put her own life on the line to smuggle out nearly 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. These unsung heroes, like Andor, didn't receive recognition until many, many years later for the contributions they made for future generations. You most likely won't be a Fred Rogers, Gandhi, or a Martin Luther King Jr., but you can do what you can with where you are at, and that's enough. There are plenty of non-violent ways you can choose to engage in, and plenty of examples of those who led the way in non-violent resistance. We've even discussed a few already in these 3 episodes. Desmond Doss, Claudette Colvin, Martin Luther King Jr. Some would argue, though, that non-violence sometimes falls short of constructive resistance. Stokely Carmichael, a key figure in the Black Power movement, argued that Martin Luther King Jr.'s reliance on nonviolence as a means of achieving social change was flawed because it assumed the opponent would respond with a sense of morality. He believed that the US system, particularly the government, was devoid of a conscience and would not be swayed by nonviolent actions like protests, redemptive suffering, or peaceful resistance. Carmichael said, in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The idea that nonviolence requires the opponent to possess a conscience is a central point of critique against the strategy of nonviolent resistance. This critique suggests that if an opponent lacks empathy, moral awareness, or a sense of justice, they may not be moved by nonviolent tactics and may even escalate their opposition. This point is often associated with the views of Stokely Carmichael and Kwame Ture, who argued that the United States lacked a conscience, making nonviolence less effective in challenging its oppressive systems. While nonviolence has been a powerful tool for social change in some cases, its effectiveness is debated when faced with opponents who are unwilling to engage with moral arguments or engage in dialogue. We built the throne that fascism now sits on, and the tyrant that we're seeing here is not foreign or new. It's simply being filled by those of us who didn't think it was as real as Black people, Native Americans, and countless overseas victims have been trying to tell us how real it was. Even a long time ago, in a land far, far away, a brown-skinned Jewish Palestinian rabbi tried to expose it. But now that we're waking up to the failure, How do we properly analyze this global state? It will get worse before it gets worse. But we all have a hope that keeps us moving forward. And the hope is that it can be better. Rebellions are built on hope. We must all be honest with ourselves and ask what motivates our decisions and actions. Are they motivated by fear, narcissism, self-indulgence, and self-preservation? Or are they motivated by self-governed principles, love for neighbor, and a desire to change things in the present for our future generations, so that they might live lives better than our own? I will close with some passages from the end of the book, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. They may be about a fictional story, but while I speak these words, imagine yourself behind them. For all the power and the terror and the destruction of the Empire and the First Order, one thing is also true. They always lose. If one half of the legacy of the Empire is death, then the other is defeat. Given enough time and enough people dedicated to resisting them, then the Empire and the First Order that followed it can be defeated. The galaxy did it at Andor and Jakku, and we have recently done it again here at Exegol. There is much hope that can be found in the realization that resistance and rebellion will always rise to meet totalitarianism. But how many times do we want to repeat this process? How often do we wish to relax complacently upon our victories and ignore the dark slivers of imperial ideology that lurk within the shadows, just biding their time? How do we make this time the last time? Equally, I refuse to bequeath the horrors of the present onto the generations of the future. I will not see our children and our grandchildren face the destruction that we have, simply because we were not willing to understand how we reached this point. That is neither right nor fair. Peace must begin with us. To begin with, we must learn, really learn, exactly what has happened here and why. The emergence of the First Order did not happen in isolation. They did not simply manifest into existence of their own accord in the unknown regions. They came from the Empire, and if they could wait 30 years before trying to reestablish what had once fallen, then so can another offshoot of patient neo-imperials. I believe it is now fair to say that, on reflection, the New Republic failed in fully explaining the Empire. To guard against the return of the Empire in yet another form, we must start the whole process of learning about it once again. Too often, we think of standing against evil as an act of bravery, when recent events have shown us that it should instead be considered out of necessity. So, we need to take the necessary steps that the New Republic could or would not. We need to say never again, and then, crucially, we need to mean it. We cannot turn our eyes away nor sleepwalk into destruction as those before us did. We must see, we must learn, and we must remember. Fight the Empire. It can be different this time, and it begins with you. Thank you for sticking around for our Star Wars Trilogy episodes. If you enjoy this content, share this with a friend who also likes Star Wars. And I'd really appreciate it if you rated and reviewed this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you can. The music used in this episode is copyright free. A big thank you to Louise Humanoid for making his music available. Check him out on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, keep an open mind, and may the Force be with you, always.